This is CultureCast. I'm Nova Safo. Today, women in our culture.
We ask them to speak up. We ask them to speak out against inequality. But if we don't teach our young girls to speak at an early age, that doesn't just happen.
Michelle Obama on cultivating women's voices, also a women's a cappella group that definitely has something to say.
One of the things that we hear a lot when we finish a concert, like when the audience is sort of talking to us, is like, wow, I had no idea that you could do that.
Women artists finding their voice. That's CultureCast, coming up.
CultureCast is a production of Chicago Radio Works. You can subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or the TuneIn app. You can also listen on our website, culturecast.org.
Welcome to CultureCast. I'm Nova Safo in Chicago. Our culture, from the artistic to the political, has been rocked in the last couple of months. We've had many allegations of misconduct and sexual harassment, mostly on the part of powerful men. A striking theme in much of the last few weeks is that women, who were the targets of abuse in many of the cases, often didn't speak up for a long time. So today, we're going to take a look at the idea of finding one's voice from a female perspective. We're going to hear from Michelle Obama and from the founder and director of an all-female a cappella group that's delivering a powerful message. First, to the former First Lady. Michelle Obama recently spoke at a summit here in Chicago focused on bringing up a new generation of leaders and activists from around the globe. Obama's interviewer was poet Elizabeth Alexander, who at one point asked how Michelle Obama uses her voice to express disagreement. Her answer starts us off today.
Well, in thinking about this question, I started I pulled back a bit, because I think the question of how you use your voice comes after you find your voice.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that a lot of people take for granted, that having a voice just happens. So in order to know how to use it and how to use it carefully and how to debate, you have to find it. And I think in particular for women, as we're seeing now, finding that voice,
Yes.
it doesn't just happen overnight. And I think about me and sort of where did my voice come from? I realize now in hindsight that I had some special parents who, from a very, very young age, understood that teaching children at a young age that their voice was valuable was important. So I didn't live in a household where kids were taught to be seen and not heard. I was allowed to speak my mind at 3 and 4. They asked my opinion. They wanted input from me and my brother about things that involved the family and life. We knew about money and paying bills, and we knew about issues in the family. You had to be respectful, but the notion that a 5-year-old wouldn't have feelings about how their life went was not something that my parents believed in. All of that early stuff, for those of us who are parents out there who are thinking about how to empower our children, it starts very early. So you can't shush them because you don't agree with them. Because every time you shush them, you're telling them, or you're telling them to respect your elders even when they're wrong. There's a difference between just respecting something that you see as wrong and not feeling it and speaking out about it. You do it in a respectful way, but we were never taught that what we saw and what we felt wasn't real, which made me ready to use my voice. So when we think about women in particular, we ask them to speak up. We ask them to speak their mind. We ask them to just say no, to speak out against sexual harassment, to speak out against inequality. But if we don't teach our young girls to speak at an early age, that doesn't just happen. It takes practice to have a voice. You have to use it again and again and again before you can say no or stop, don't touch me, If you're taught that adults are right all the time, it's hard to go against the power that is around you. And I don't think that I had those roadblocks when I was young.
Michelle Obama speaking at a summit held here in Chicago. Coming up, women's voices in soaring song.
CultureCast is brought to you by Millennial Sanctimony. Between the K leading, yoga practicing, and everyone embracing, we're certainly qualified to tell you how wrong you are. Millennial sanctimony. It's totally not annoying because it's true. CultureCast is also brought to you by hypocrisy. It's that thing the guy with a different opinion is doing all the time. Hypocrisy. Find it in people around you, but never in yourself, of course.
And you're listening to CultureCast from Chicago Radio Works. Thanks for spending some time with us today. You're in for a treat right now. I'd like to introduce you to a women's a cappella vocal ensemble by the name of La Cachina. The group's founder is Carling Fitzsimmons. Their mission is to inject a powerful women's point of view into the music world. Their latest album is Open Book, and one of the songs on it really got my attention. The song is called We Are, written for the group by composer Catherine Pukinskis. Here's Carling Fitzsimmons to explain the song.
The first sound is this shh, and then that shh materializes into she.
She doesn't know the answer.
What Kay did was take a bunch of things that women hear a lot of the time when we are in contexts that are traditionally masculine spheres, which is pretty much any sphere because our society is the way that it is.
How did you get here? Who let you in?
They must have needed a girl to balance the group,
The board,
the panel.
the class.
And so taking those things that are aimed at women and are meant to be derogatory and turning them into a rallying cry by the end of the piece. So the piece really helps to transform this sort of suppressive sound into a powerful sonic landscape by the end of the piece. So the performing and rehearsing of that piece helped us seize the essence of that message and internalize it as an ensemble and as individual artists, I think.
Right now, obviously, we're in the middle of the Me Too hashtag campaign. A lot of women are coming forward to tell their stories. Has your performance of the piece evolved with the cultural landscape evolving?
Yes, absolutely. Last fall when we performed the piece, we just sort of presented it. We didn't really push on the message of the piece.
And that was the premiere.
That was the premiere. But this fall, having recorded the album over the summer, we had the experience of overdubbing the dialogue, standing in a circle, hearing all those things said out loud, one right after the other like that. I remember we all just sort of sat there at the end of the final take and just like looked at each other with these wide eyes because like it's a lot, it's heavy, it sits on you to hear those words in that way. And so we decided as we were performing this fall, let's give the audience that experience as well. And Patty, the executive director and our highest soprano, printed out a sheet of paper for everyone with all of those lines on it. And so we just, before we performed the piece, we said all those words for the audience to hear as well. And there's just this sort of silence like settled over everybody, and it made the piece ring in a different way, I think.
What's it been like for you as a woman conductor, as a woman director of a music company? Have you had to break through in a way that, had to work harder, had to prove yourself in a way? Do you have those kinds of stories?
Yeah, I think any woman who has had to break through or be a leader has those kinds of stories, which is sad and unifying at the same time. Like, I feel like I'm not alone, but I am in a certain way. Fighting against the girl group illegitimizing of La Cachina took a while, and I still feel like we're doing that to a certain extent. And it helps that we're living in a time where this kind of dialogue exists about traditionally marginalized groups of people being given their day in court, essentially, being given their share of the conversation. And so I don't feel uncomfortable about calling my, male colleagues on, like, hey, let me speak, or let La Cachina speak, or, like, how about giving someone else a chance to talk, which is important. And I feel like I'm always maybe going to be breaking through, and that makes me stronger.
Michelle Obama in the summit said, it takes practice to find your voice. So I wanted to put that to you. How have you found your voice?
I have led a very privileged life. I grew up actually in Oak Park, so just the first suburb west of here, to parents who believed that me and my sister could be anything we wanted to be and never told us, because you're a girl or for any reason, you can't do something. So I grew up feeling that I was entitled to expressing my opinion. And it wasn't until I graduated from college and came out into the real world where I'm suddenly in dialogue with not only, just my peers, but also people who are much older than me, people who've had much more experience, both in the field that I'm working in and then also in life, that I felt like, oh, I might need to censor some of this and sit back and listen for a little bit and do my learning not by testing something out and seeing how it goes and how it feels coming out of my mouth, but by thinking it first and then expressing once I've really gathered all the information. So for me, finding my voice has been a lot about listening to other people's and understanding how mine can add to the conversation rather than just adding to the noise.
So let's talk about the name of the group, La Cachina. Tell me how you came up with the name.
Yeah. People always ask, is it La Cucina, like the kitchen? I'm like, oh, haha, that's cute, but no. It's we've sort of adopted a Baroque composer named Francesca Caccini as our patron saint. So Francesca Caccini wrote her own music at a time when it was very unusual for women to be writing music. She was also a multi-instrumentalist. She was really pushing the envelope, and she had a beautiful singing voice, and she was well respected by her male and female peers in the music world alike.
Now we're talking about the 16th, 17th centuries?
Yes, that's right. When we founded the ensemble, we were sort of flirting around with a bunch of different names, but La Cachina just felt like we were continuing a legacy that already existed and acknowledging that legacy at the same time as building and making it our own.
It is very rare to have female composers performed at all, even ones from the past, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And that's something that I make a conscious effort to do as well in programming. It's like, okay, how many men do we have on this program versus how many women? And how can we give more female composers their due on a concert?
How do you find new audiences for your music, people who may not be thinking about, oh, let me go hear a classical choir perform? For one thing, you guys don't just do classical music, but how do you reach people? How do you get them to show up? It's so hard for people to leave their comfortable homes, turn off the Netflix, and show up and sit down in a place, be quiet, and listen to music.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we found too, is that sometimes, like, no matter what you do, it's a rainy night and your audience is going to be smaller. But I think what we have tried to do more than anything else is not just present a concert of music, but really present the audience with an experience. So you're not just coming to hear the music, you're coming to be transported to another place, whether that's in your mind, you're being transported back in time, as in our medieval Christmas concert that we did for the past 2 seasons, or whether it's I'm going to be transported back to a time in my life where Joni Mitchell was like really a big part of my musical experience. So part of crafting that experience is thinking about the venue in which we're performing. Does it always have to be a church? Does it always have to be a sort of concert venue? Or can we sing in a bar? Can we sing at a black box theater? Trying to make sure that our audiences feel comfortable is a really big part of that. And
So
then
I'm assuming you have done those things, sing in
yeah.
a bar, sing at
we have,
Box bar,
and you
black
know what?
box.
It's really fun to do that kind of singing because, I don't know, singing in a bar. So, for example, last spring, we covered Joni Mitchell's Blue, which is a record that means a lot to many of our singers, and it turns out means a lot to a lot of our audience members as well. And then we put it in this like bookstore/bar called Kibitz Nest for one night, and then we performed at Uncommon Ground for the second night. And like the audience feels comfortable like shouting back at you when you're doing your like in-between song banter. And people like whoop it up and clap and snap and drink and get a bite to eat while you're singing. And there's something very communal and warm about that experience that feels really natural and right. I think part of the reason that classical music is struggling in so many ways is that it's such an isolating experience even when you go to a concert. Like you think of going to the opera or the CSO even.
The Chicago Symphony Orchestra.
And like you sit and you're quiet, and even in between movements you're quiet, and even if the soloist does something so like heartbreakingly beautiful or like rousing or amazing, at a rock concert you would stand up and shout. At the CSO or any sort of classical Western orchestra, you sit quietly with your hands in your lap until the appropriate time to applaud. And I think that's damaging to classical music and antithetical to how it would have been performed in the day. I understand why, we don't want to miss the beauty of what's coming next, but let's try and figure out a way to marry the two so that people can express their enjoyment in a way that feels natural for our society to do, but also experience the integrity of the piece. And that's what La Cacina tries to do by performing in these unconventional venues. It's like, let's have an experience together and acknowledge that we're all in this room.
How has the response been to your group? Do you find people are generally very receptive and love what you're doing? Do they want to give you unsolicited advice? Where does it fall in that kind of spectrum? You're laughing.
I am because the unsolicited advice is like a hot button issue for me. In general, I think people are surprised by La Cacina. One of the things that we hear a lot when we finish a concert, like when the audience is sort of talking to us, is like, wow, I had no idea that you could do that, because we do sing in so many different genres and we try to do all of it very successfully. So I think in diversifying what we do, we are at once setting ourselves up for success and setting ourselves up for failure, because there is no one thing that La Cacina does. It's not just, oh, they're a Renaissance group like Anonymous 4, or, oh, they're a folk group like any number of excellent women's folk ensembles. But the response has been surprise, also surprise that we're so young and performing at the level that we are, which, that's the goal. But I think now that we're sort of hitting our stride and that we figured out who we are and what we want to say and what we want to contribute to the cultural landscape of Chicago and ultimately the country and hopefully the world someday, I think people are understanding that the bar has been set at a certain place, and like they also want to rise and be part of that. There are many sort of young new ensembles coming up now at the same time that we are coming up, and I think that's awesome, because for every one of us that steps into a successful place, it makes room for the rest of us to succeed and thrive.
Carlene Fitzsimmons, director of the a cappella group La Cacina. Their latest album is Open Book. Also, a special thanks to the organization's Chicago filmmakers for use of their facilities to record that interview. And that's CultureCast for this week. A special note, La Cachina's next concert is here in Chicago on December 8th. If you want to go, there's more info on our website, culturecast.org. Also, make sure not to miss an episode. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite player app. Search for CultureCast from Chicago Radio Works. I'm Nova Safo in Chicago. Thanks for listening.